So today we're going to be having a look at a couple of game settings that I would recommend you guys to check out and potentially even change. I believe that a lot of these are going to get overlooked, particularly by newcomers to the franchise. So if you have any friends that are starting their Monster Hunter journey with Monster Hunter Wilds, make sure to share this video with them and hopefully this will help them out. So let's go ahead and jump into the options. As you can see, whenever you open up the menu, there's going to be a bunch of stuff in here. Got items and equipment, missions and quests, blah, 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 blah. We're going to scroll right down to the end of it into system. Then we're going to jump into the options. So one of the first things that shows up is damage numbers. In the event that you want more detailed damage numbers, you can hit display with decimals, and this is going to give you the decimal values as well. Me personally, I usually just go with whole values. That works fine for me, so I'm going to leave it as is. You can also turn off damage numbers entirely if you're an old school monster hunter that prefers the way that it was back in the old days. Now, one of the things that usually bothers me in a lot of video games is minimap rotation. I prefer minimap to be fixed. It just helps me orientate myself way better than if it's just like constantly spinning. It just helps with my personal pattern recognition, so I like having it fixed. So that is where you can change that as well right in the beginning. The next page, there's another detailed map rotation. This is for the main map, the big one that you go into, and you look at all of the different things that are on there. You can have that one also be fixed. Now, another thing that we have here is your health gauge display. By default, it's set to dynamic. That means that it is going to collapse in on itself whenever you aren't taking damage or you aren't in active combat. Some players prefer to always have it up, so you can change that here so that it is fixed and it always displays so that you always know how much health do I have? Do I have my food buff? Do I not have my food buff? Because you can see that from your health. Even though there's other ways to checking your food buff, you can press L1 if you want to check that. But yeah, there's also one for the sharpness gauge and all of that stuff. So if that's something that you want to mess with, you can check it there. If you happen to be doing a lot of multiplayer and you're feeling a little bit overwhelmed by the special effects on screen, you can also turn some of those off by removing your ally hit effects or your ally critical effects, or you can leave the critical effects and just remove normal hits. This is something that you can do as well. Continuing right along, we have here Sacred Auto Explore, which sometimes can be a little bit wonky. Usually I like to keep this one off. What this does is if you're just sitting around on Sacred not doing anything, the Sacred will start moving to random locations. That is not, for instance, when you are chasing a monster and you're trying to wrangle your Sacred and it seems like it keeps just like defaulting to go after the monster. You can press down D-pad on that and your Sacred will go into full manual mode and it will stop doing that. It's just down D-pad. I don't know what the key is for that on PC though. Sorry, you'll have to check the controls. There's some optional options here for your support hunters in case you don't want your support hunters doing offset attacks or power clashes or stuff like that, because these are all things that have like a threshold on the monster and they will be consuming this. This is for the NPC hunters. You can mess around with that if that is something that you do not want to have them do, right? Oh, I don't want them wasting my mounts or something like that, right? Then we have this one, which is very important for some of us that do not like bloated damage numbers on weapons, which is the weapon attack power display. So right now I have it to display without coefficient. So what does this do? For those of you that are newcomers, by default, if you look at a great sword and then you look at a dual blades of the same tier, you're going to expect, oh, the great sword deals more damage because it's slower. That is with coefficient. It will show you the greatsword with the bloated value to be like, oh yes, this weapon does way more damage than the dual blades. But in reality, that's not really the case. And it makes it way easier for us to compare the damage between weapons and the tier of weapons if you display it without the coefficient, which is true raw damage. So most hunters will prefer this. If you're a newcomer, you might prefer with coefficient, but ultimately, as you become more and more experienced, you want to get used to this. Because the way that it works with Monster Hunter is that all weapons in the same tier effectively do similar damage. What changes is their movement value, which is the value of the attack itself. So for instance, the Great Sword with the True Charge Slash is going to have really big movement value. So that multiplies with the actual raw damage, and that is what causes the damage that you see whenever you hit a true charge slash. Whereas if you happen to be playing with dual blades, their movement value is going to be significantly lower, but you're going to be hitting multiple times. That's how that works. If you display width coefficient, it gives you like an estimate of what the weapon damage is going to be rather than its true raw. So what that means is this makes it easier for you to compare weapons in the same tier, and this makes it easier for you to understand the damage of the weapons if you're a newcomer, I guess. I would recommend people to get used to display without coefficient as soon as you can, because everything works way better that way, and you're going to have a better understanding of how the game actually works, in my personal opinion. Now, once we move on to the control section, one of the first things that I would recommend you turn off is auto sheath. Auto sheath is something that is going to get you killed. I don't even know why there's an option to auto sheath. This option should not exist at all, because what's going to happen is if you happen to be fighting a monster and then you move away a little bit or whatever and your weapon might sheath out of nowhere and you're like, oh no, my weapon sheath. The monster comes in, slaps you across the face. Get used to manual sheathing and unsheathing of your weapon, okay? It will make you a better hunter. Trust me on that. Now, item use controls is a controller-only thing. By default, what they have you do is type 1, which is whenever you are doing the radial menu, you're supposed to release the right stick in order to use an item. So you would, flick your stick up and then release it, and then it will do the thing. I find that to be very imprecise. I like clicking things, makes way more sense. I would recommend type 2 for this particular option, where rather than flicking your stick and sometimes it not working, you just select the item, press down on the stick itself, you press on your right stick, and that will use the item itself. So, in my opinion, this is a far superior way of doing things, but to each their own, as per usual. Now, this one is going to be very specific, which is focus mode. On the second page of controls, you have here hold to activate or press to toggle. Now, number one, if you're playing Insect Glaive, you should be only playing with toggle mode. That is my honest opinion, because toggle mode just has a series of advantages for Insect Glaive. But nowadays, I am even considering most weapons potentially should be using toggle mode, because of something that the community has been exploring recently. I've seen a video from Cowslayer on it, and I've seen a video from somebody else on Twitter, whose name I'm misremembering, but there's something that they're calling focus magnetism. And basically what that means is whenever you are in focus mode, there's way more forward momentum to your attacks, which helps you with positioning your attacks towards the monster. So I would recommend players to potentially get used to using this with toggle mode. But here you just get to select it. Do you want to hold the right trigger to go into focus mode, or do you want to press it once and you toggle it? This is something that you should most definitely check out. And then finally, if you happen to be on PC, maybe your controller buttons are showing up with different buttons. You can manually choose which buttons you want displayed on your controller here. You have all of the buttons possible available, except for switch, I guess. But yeah, you have all... No, actually, this is the Switch layout now that I think about it, the A, B, X, Y. But yeah, you can choose whatever layout you want for your buttons. Right now I have the PlayStation because I've been using a DualSense controller. So now, let's talk about camera. Extremely important. One of the first things that you want to be touching up on is going to be the camera zoom. So obviously here you have all the controls of like sensitivity. You should adjust this to whatever you feel comfortable with, but these are not what I'm drawing your attention to. It is going to be here. Camera distance zoom. This dictates how far away from your character the camera is. You can kind of see it zooming in and out of my character. Most players will want the camera fully zoomed out. Then you also have camera distance pan. This is in case you want the camera to be a little bit off-center from your character. I don't know who would use this. I personally don't use this, but yeah, you can do this, and your character stays more to the left for whatever reason. I guess this might be useful if you're playing with guns, maybe? I don't know. But usually the most important thing here is straight up camera distance zoom. Now, another thing that is going to be turned on by default for some strange godforsaken reason is the focus camera. You want to be turning this off as well. I know that it is tempted to keep this particular setting on because basically what this does is it kind of like soft locks onto a monster, but in reality, what happens is whenever you're trying to look around, because Monster Hunter is not the type of game where you're locked into monsters, at least not in my opinion. You do have that option if you want to do that. This is enabled by default. But usually as a hunter, you want to be aware of everything that is around you. And if the camera is constantly zooming back to the monster every time you're trying to look at something else, things get a little bit wonky, particularly if there's multiple monsters fighting and you're not aware where's the second monster, or oh, I need to find out where the trap is. You want to look around, the camera just kind of like flicks back to the monster. It gets a little bit frustrating for me, so I would recommend disabling that, but again, experiment with this at your own leisure. The next setting is going to be target camera control type. I believe it is actually defaulted to type 1, which is pretty good, which basically means you press one button, which is usually the left bumper if you're on controller, and you press that and the camera will automatically aim towards the monster. It won't lock onto it, it will just like flick the camera so that you have the monster centered on your camera. In my opinion, this is the best one, but there are some different variations that you can experiment with. I believe Type 1 comes enabled by default, and if it's not, I would recommend you guys to check out Type 1. Now, another thing that gets a lot of players annoyed is the monster sighting camera. Now, this is a cinematic option, which is whenever you see a monster for the first time, the camera kind of like focuses in, shows you the monster and all of that stuff. We used to call this one the breakneck camera back in Monster Hunter World. And if you don't like that, you can just go ahead and disable this if it bothers you. Usually I keep it on for my first playthrough, but for a second playthrough, I would definitely turn it off. In my streaming playthrough, I'm going to keep it on just for you guys, but yeah, usually I would turn this off second playthrough because I don't want the breakneck camera effect happening. Now, when it comes to visual settings, I'm not really going to go too much in depth with this stuff because this is going to depend on your hardware and all of that. One of the recommendations that I would potentially make would be to fiddle around with shadow quality, because this is usually one of the best ways of increasing your performance. Lower like shadow quality a little bit, lower your shadow distance rendering and all of that good stuff. But one of the things that I do want to call to your attention is cutscene graphics. So they have different graphical modes for cutscenes, and the reason why this is kind of like a cool thing is because if you happen to be running on a more modest rig and you're like, oh, I want to get the best performance possible, you're going to tweak these settings to the point where the game is not going to look as good when you zoom into the characters. But because you're looking at your characters zoomed out in the middle of a fight, it's not as big of a deal. But then the cutscene pops up and it's going to look like garbage. So you can alter the cutscene quality, and even if you get less frame rate in the cutscene, it's not as important because you're not really playing the game. So you can just appreciate the cutscene at a higher fidelity. Test this option out, see what works for you. There's also settings, I think in the tent or somewhere, in order for you to see previous cutscenes. So check that out for yourself. And finally, in the audio section, in the event that you do not like your Palico speaking, which I know that a lot of players do not appreciate that, there's feline language in the audio section right here that you can go ahead and use swap, and you can either swap them back to feline where you just hear the meows, or you can actually have them use voice. I'm going to be using voice myself, but that is going to be a personal preference. So hopefully these settings improve your hunting experience. Do let me know in the comment section down below if there's a particular setting that you feel that I've missed so that other players would be aware of it. But that is going to be it for now. If you guys enjoyed the video, if it was helpful to you in any way, hit the like button, subscribe, bell notification icon, all that jazz, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Stay strong, stay safe. Peace out.